Mach 3, give me crew show on 2, 3, and 4.
So line 1, actually 1.
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start line 2.
5 electric. Mach 3. Line 2, Mach 9.
Mach 3, give me start line 1 and crew show on 7 and 9.
Line 1, crew show 7 and 9, Mach 9.
Yeah, do something. I hate weapons.
Super Ops, line 3, Reservoir Avionics.
Super Ops. Line 4 is code 3 for engine vibe.
Fuck. Hey, so I started a Patreon because frankly, this stuff's getting expensive. Nothing will change the podcast or the blog if you don't subscribe, but if you want early access to episodes, monthly AMAs, episode shoutouts, voting on podcast topics, and all kinds of 20 Years Done gear, head over to patreon.com/20yearsdone. This month's top tier Patreon shoutout goes to Kevin Traw, Robbie Walker, Travis Barnes, JT Owens, and Delinda Baker. Thanks for the support. Okay, so today I'm joined by someone I work with for quite a while. His name's Daniel Hopkins. He retired from the Air Force. We retired around 2016, it looks like.
Yep, 2016, December. Yeah.
And you were a master sergeant?
I was.
Okay. And so me and Hoppy worked together in the 310th in the early 2000s. But actually, the more I thought about it, I think you were in the 308th in like 1998, right?
I was. That's where I first met you. You were.
Yeah, because I was a tech school. I was going through hot training.
Yeah, you were on my jet.
Oh, that's
yeah.
so
I was thinking about that last night. Yeah, it's the first time I met you. You were on my jet to launch it out for that day with MRA. So
also, I was scared out of my mind. I'm not sure if it was obvious then, but I was definitely scared out of my mind.
You asked a lot of questions. That's what I remember about you. And I was telling my wife, I was like, yeah, I remember. He came to launch my jet and he just kind of followed me around asking me all kinds of questions, which was good. Like, it was like, you were very inquisitive of like, hey man, what
I was very unsure is what it was. I was like fucking afraid that somehow launching the jet wrong would result in a Class A mishap. Little did I know that it wouldn't.
But you were a good student. So
yeah. So, and then I want to dip. So today we're going to talk about training and how the Air Force does training and Hoppy's experience with training, both as a civilian, training development in the Air Force. Because you've been involved in training, looks like for about 10 or 12 years. Is that about right?
Yeah. So in 2008, I was sitting happy at the 310th. I was expediting and got non-vol orders to shepherd. So that's kind of how I was thrown into the training world. So
how'd you feel about those non-vol orders to shepherd?
So to be honest, at first I was kind of upset and angry because, I was on that typical crew chief trajectory. I was a staff and I was driving the truck and, the next step, I just couldn't make tech. Like, it was hard. It took me 5 times to make tech, and I forget the lead pro super's name at that time, but I remember him sitting me in the office the last time I tested and didn't make it. He's like, Hoppy, you got to do something, man. You got to make it so we can keep you in the truck. Right.
Yeah.
And, but I was on that trajectory to, typical crew chief career, and then all of a sudden get these orders out of nowhere to go to shepherd of all places. Right. And, but to be honest, man, it was a blessing in disguise, and it turned out to be the best assignment I ever had. It just showed me skills that I didn't know that I had, and just a whole new world of the Air Force and the side of maintenance training. So it was good. It turned out to be a really good 4 years. And then after that, I retired as the det chief out of Seymour Johnson. So.
And then you did, looks like maintenance training for Lockheed, doing F-35 training at Luke, it looks like.
Yeah, so my first job out of retirement was with Lockheed Martin, teaching F-35 at the MRA program.
Nice.
And then now I'm with Top Aces out at Mesa, and I'm their training and development manager for the F-16 program.
Yeah, and I really want to talk about that because I want to see how much of what you took from the Air Force helped stand up Top Aces stuff, because I think that's really going to inform a lot of the perspectives. So I don't know if you're. I'm gonna detour from the training real quick because I want to see if you remember. Do you remember? It was probably like 2005. Do you remember where I defected from my crew chief flight to your crew chief flight for like a week?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was I had two. It was me and another 7 level on swing shift in A flight, and that guy had not done anything like for multiple days at a time, and I was catching all the fucking X's, And then I had to get a tire. And I'm like, where the fuck is this guy at? Why isn't he getting the tires? And I went inside and he was literally writing his own EPR, giving himself a Firewall 5 while he was not working. And I flipped the fuck out and I started cussing out the flight chief and the expediter and this guy. And then I just defected to your side and I walked over and it was you like working, I think, a landing gear problem, and Rodney was working like a no start, and Osterwalder was working something else. And I was like, oh, this must be what it's like, where there's like a shared workload between 7 levels, where each 7 level is like running something. And then unfortunately, A-Flight went home early that night because all there was a fucking tire. I picked the wrong night to fucking defect and mutiny. But I hung out with you guys all night, but you didn't need me, which was really bizarre. So I just like floated around and helped out. And then the next day I went to your roll call and people were like, what the fuck are you doing in our roll call? I'm like, I'm not working for that shitty ass fucking flight anymore. And then like 3 days later, the expert came over. He's like, I'm really sorry. Can you please come back and work for me again? I'm like, okay. So I thought that was a funny story that I never wrote about, but it also speaks. Yeah, it also speaks to what the last podcast we were talking to Jason about. Basically, I think staffs and senior airmen have a lot more power than they realize, and they can just fucking say, I'm not doing this anymore. So I guess, I kind of like sent some talking points, but really it's, so I guess I'll start with my tech school experience. And I wasn't like necessarily mechanically inclined. And when I went through tech school, it felt like it was very much a fucking blur where you see a task like once. I mean, I'm also talking 1998. I'm sure it was radically different when you were at Shepherd, but it's like the academics was really abstract and it was really hard to connect the academic portion with the hands-on portion, and the hands-on portion didn't seem like there was enough time, at least for me, to like grasp what was going on. And when I showed up to the line, which is probably evident in the fact that I was asking you a billion questions in hot training, is like I didn't feel like I had anything in the tank from Shepherd, which could very well just be a confidence issue or just the magnitude of all the stuff you had to learn at Shepherd, or the fact that it's really hard to put it into practice till you start doing the job and you kind of connect the dots and the pieces. I guess what's your impression of how knowledgeable and how, I mean, it's called mission ready airmen or mission ready technicians. How mission ready are they really, do you think?
That's probably the one. First of all, I want to say, like, I do think the Air Force training program for maintenance, first, it's huge, right? I mean, it's uncomparable to anything else in the world, I think, because the amount of people and money that is put into the production of training is just astronomical, right? I mean, there's just millions and millions of dollars and hundreds and maybe thousands of people to manage just maintenance training, right? Not alone pilot training or, any other thing, but, AETC alone as a command, it's just got a huge budget and huge responsibility to train, the Air Force's people. So with that, they do the best they can to produce an airman or a mechanic the cheapest and the most effective way. But I do think they missed the mark. And here's where I think they missed the mark is with the MRA or MRT concept. It's funny, when I retired, there was a bunch of old videos in the debt that I was working at Luke. They still had one of those TV trays. You know how you used to have to wheel the TV in to say, hey, we're going to watch a video, right? They actually still had one in a classroom. And it was there was a bunch of videos on it, and then one of them said AETC MRT, and I popped it in, and it was from the early 90s, maybe early, and that's when the program began, and it was the AETC commander sitting there explaining this new concept called the MRT, and basically what that program was to do was to put an airman right out of basic through the pipeline, get them to the flight line where they are qualified to do all of these tasks hands off. Like, these guys are ready. They're mission ready, right? But I think that's a misconception. I think it's, and I actually think it's kind of dangerous in a way. Although if you statistically, I haven't really looked into it, and I really should. If you look at it overall, if you look at the big macro level, it looks like it works, right? Because people aren't dying, aircraft aren't crashing every day, the job gets done. But at the micro level, somebody like you walking into a place saying, wait a second, I don't think I'm ready. Like, I don't think I understand, because you're given so much information. There's so much information that is crammed down their throats. And it just kind of misses the mark of like, hey, let's give them the basics and send them out, and let's let the flight line train them. And I'm kind of glad. So one of the reasons why I quit, or didn't quit, but stopped with Lockheed, was because the contract ran out because the Air Force went to a new concept. They're kind of flipping the MRA. I don't even think they're calling it that anymore. But now, instead of them going right out of Shepherd to an MRA program, they're going to FTAC. They're going to their duty station first, going through FTAC, and then going to an FTD course to get that type of training.
Yeah, Jason had mentioned that on last week's podcast, actually.
Yeah.
And he's kind of frustrated with it. So I'm interested in your take on that process as well.
I think in the long term, it's going to be better, because here's why, right? So when I came in 97, and I got to my first duty station, and there was guys like Rick White, Jerry Shank. I don't know if you remember those guys, right?
I remember Jerry Shank for sure.
Sure. These guys grew up in a OJT environment. Like, they went to, what was that base up north? Chinook.
Yep.
Chinook, yeah. So they all went there for a little bit of training, right, for a couple of weeks. And then they went to their first duty station, and everything was OJT. Everything for them was on the job training, right? So basically they had to grow within their unit, like with their unit. And so those guys were good mechanics, right? Those are people that I cut my teeth on. And guys like Mike Helm and Garcia, these guys, they're the ones that kind of showed me, how to be a good mechanic. Mm-hmm. And they didn't grow up in that type of tech school environment. They were basically thrown to the wolves. And not to say that's the best type, but I think there's a good balance in between, right? Of just letting the airmen find the basics. What do we need to know? What do I need to know not to kill myself on the first day, right? Yep. How to stay safe, get some basic understanding of what an airplane is and the mechanics of how systems work, and then allow the unit to train that person in the way that they need. But the old problem is the personnel issue, right? Like, yep. Who's going to take the time? But it's a mindset change. It has to happen. Pilots get a wingman. Yep. Pilots come out of B course and they go to their unit. There's no way. They get observed and they're trained one-on-one with someone before they're just thrown out and said, okay, you can be a flight lead now, right? So they have that where a team comes alongside that person and grows them. And I've just never understood why that concept can't work in the maintenance field. And the other thing, I was talking to Jason about this the other day at work, and we disagreed on it. And I said, there's too much reliance on the training itself. Like, hey, Airman so-and-so, you just went to training, so you yep. should know how to do this 100%. And I go out and do it, without anybody observing you. Oh, and if you mess something up, we're just going to blame the training. We're not going to blame your manager or your supervisor or your flight chief, because how many times, and I learned this, I became better at this once I was in the training environment. But how many times have you gotten a new troop and you're just like, hey, you've been trained, you know how to do this. So I don't really have to teach you anything else. But I think that's a false narrative, and it's a dangerous one.
Especially considering, like, in the maintenance environment, ego and pride and confidence is like so crucial to surviving that very often people are afraid to raise their hand and say, I don't know how to do X. And the simpler X is, the less likely they are to stand up and say they don't know how to do it. Right. I remember one of the first things I did on the line was we had like a low tire. And the last time I had done tire servicing was in tech school. And so when it came time to service the tire up, like, that's like the most innocuous sort of like task there is almost.
Right.
I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And Brian Cottle like looked at me and could see like the panic and the doubt. And he's like, I'll go get the stuff and we'll do it together, which was very generous. But I would have sooner died than admit that I didn't know how to do this super simple task. And it would have been, I'm going to figure out as I go. And that's where the danger comes in, because the assumption is, oh, you learn how to do tire servicing in tech school and it's so easy, you should be good to go. And no, that's why there's also TBA, where it's like, you're signed, like, I saw you do this, you know how to do this, you're confident up to this particular knowledge level or proficiency level, and you're good to go. I agree.
That 3C level, I think, especially at the tech school environment, can be very vague, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what qualifies as 3C according to the CFEPT is like, hey, you can do this task unsupervised without any help. You know how to follow the TO. You know how to find the tools. You know what to do. You know how to operate the equipment. And at Shepherd, you're qualifying guys to the 3C level, and then also at MRA, right? You're qualifying guys to the 3C level. And I think a lot of the hands-off attitude of the units, I'm not saying all of them are like that, right? I'm sure, I've had good supervisors and stuff, but my hands-off level of like, hey, you've been trained, I think the cause of that is the MRA program, is that 3C qualified airman concept. It gives an excuse for people not to have to engage their new troops when they come to their unit, or gives the excuse to say, hey, you're an idiot because you don't know how to do this. Who was your tech school instructor, right? Not everybody's at the same level, right?
Yep.
I had students with ASVAB scores in the 40s, 30s as in the mechanical section, all the way up to 90s, right? So there's no real vetting process of like, hey, you have good mechanical skills. Some of them don't know what a screwdriver is or a wrench, and you really have to show them and tell them, explain to them, what that is.
And I think that's a legitimate fault too, because I'm gonna spill the beans on my ASVAB score. Like, I was a 96 in admin and like an 86 in general, and mechanical was like my lowest score at a 58. My recruiter's like, hey, you qualify for open mechanical. You can go open mechanical. And I'm like, well, even at like 18, I was like, well, isn't this like the armed services vocational aptitude? Like, aren't you supposed to like line me up with the highest score? Because that is a predictor for performance and competence. And he's like, you don't understand. You meet the minimum for mechanical. Sure. You can go mechanical. And it's like, I think part of the process is the Air Force has an aptitude test and they treat it as a floor instead of a target when they're trying to recruit people and put them in. And I think they're missing out. Now, in hindsight, I'm really glad I didn't go into a non-er job, and the podcast after this one, I'm interviewing a non-er to talk about it. But like, I think I would have been miserable, but according to the ASVAB, I probably would have grasped all the stuff way fucking better. So, and I might, and if I had spent 20 years as an honor, I might be able to got that email out of my drafts or outbox and send it to you in a timely manner, because I would have had 20 years of office experience under my belt, and it wouldn't have been such a shit show yesterday coordinating. But I think the Air Force does a very poor job at aligning recruitment with aptitude and putting them into the right sort of career fields.
Oh, for sure. I think, I was never a recruiter, but being on the receiving end, right, of students, I can definitely tell there's a quota fill.
Mm-hmm.
There's a, hey, like you said, you meet the minimum, you can fill this quota for this month. We need F-35 crew chiefs, or we need F-16 crew chief. The F-16 crew chief next to security forces is probably it's the largest, one of the largest career fields in the Air Force, right? So there's a huge need for personnel. And so they just have to, they got to fill bodies. They got to meet their quotas that month too. And so they have to fill. But I will say this, we did have a vetting process of, there's plenty of people that I've had to throw to other career fields just because they weren't cutting it as a maintainer. But there was processes in place to kind of weed them out if they weren't doing well.
Yeah. So I guess also I'm interested in how often was that process or how often did that standard for weeding someone out fluctuate depending on the demand of the service for that particular, like when there was like a huge vacuum of crew chiefs, was that influencing you guys' decision to retrain people or to cut people or to fail people if there was a huge demand from the field, either overtly or covertly?
No, that's a good question. I will say, the Air Force is really good at policies and procedures. That is something that was kind of followed. If you weren't cutting the mustard, if you failed a block test twice, and remedial training wasn't, an SIA, specialized individual training wasn't helping. You were pretty quickly. There was a path for you to go somewhere else.
So I also know that when, as a flight chief / supervisor out in the field, there was like, I can't remember how long after the new kid got there, but there was like a survey.
Oh yeah, that stopped too after a while. Yeah, there was supposed to be a field survey, right? That you were supposed to fill out and be like, hey, this guy, thanks for what you brought us, right? Or what are you guys doing? And those can be very subjective surveys, I find, because when I got into the manager side of at Shepherd, I would see the results of those surveys come back, and a lot of them were still that mentality of, this guy's an idiot. How'd you let him get through? Right. Well, he met the standards. Right.
Yeah.
And that's all you got to do. You got to meet the standards, meet or exceed the standards. And so personality doesn't come into play and all that. It's, hey, the Air Force has set a standard, and if they meet it or exceed it, they're on their way to your shop, right? No matter how much they may or may not understand it at first.
So were those responses like really qualitative, where it was like you said, this guy's dumb, but they can't like this task they don't know how to do. It's showing it's a 3C and he is totally lost. Like, is it just that they were like, hey, you gave us a guy has a bad attitude and he's dumb or whatever? And is that why like they weren't useful or why they went away?
I think people just stopped doing them. When I got to Seymour, of course we were more FTD, but we had an MRA program there for the 15s. I don't remember getting any after that. Like during that 4 years, I don't remember getting any surveys or understanding why they stopped. And I remember even one commander going, hey, yeah, we don't get those anymore. I wonder why. Right. So it's like, so somewhere they fell through the,
yeah, that seems like an important, like feedback to,
sure.
But also it seems like there should be feedback to the recruiter. And then, like,
right.
Really what I've learned out throughout my career, the idea that your military is not customer service, but the reality is everyone in the military is a customer for somebody else. You're
right.
a customer from the recruiter. The aircraft maintenance community is a customer from you as training. The pilots
sure.
are the customer of the maintenance training or the maintenance environment, and the terrorists are the customers of the pilots, I guess, is
sure.
how that, right? But they don't fill out surveys, as it turns out. So I guess like, it seems strange that they would have turned off those. Like if the surveys aren't working, which is a distinct possibility, either because they weren't well crafted or they weren't being done at the field, or when the field was doing it, it was totally subjective and not objective sort of measurements that didn't help. Like that would tell me I would want to retweak the survey, not just give up on the survey. That seems strange.
Well, anytime they want to make a change, it takes forever. With AETC, it does. It takes forever. Like they're writing a new AFI or anything. So I'm pretty sure it probably a new draft of a new AFI was coming out and it was just not included yet.
Yeah.
But I do know this. I think one of the fallacies of the surveys is the point of, these guys are graduating tech school, and now you and I, we didn't go through FTAC, but now, right. But we went on leave. You probably went on leave. I don't know. I did. So you go on a couple of weeks of leave and then you come back and you do 2 or 3 weeks of FTAC. So you're already 2-3 months, outside of training.
Yep.
Before you even come in and start doing any type of work. And, I've taken a lot of training myself. And if you're not applying those skills right away, then you're going to lose it.
That's
you're going to forget. You're going to lose it. And that's why I am happy to see that this new concept with the training flip and go away from the tech school pipeline. Because now you're not a tech school student anymore. Now you're a permanent resident, permanent duty airman. And now you're going through your last month of training at your permanent duty station through the FTD there. And I think it'll be more personal and it'll be more beneficial to the units.
So
in my opinion.
What me and Jason talked about last week was that having guys show up that haven't been through MRA or MRT kind of inflates the unit numbers, even though the experience isn't there. And then you like lose them. Well, Jason was frustrated because he's like, well, I get these guys and I immediately pair them up with one of my best senior airmen and I start doing the shadowing and they're teaching them. And then when I finally get them up to speed, then FTD pulls them for hot training to reteach them all the stuff that I've already taught them. I'd rather just keep them at that point.
Sure.
Was his argument there, which kind of goes back to the Mike Helm model of OJT can do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good, and that's the feedback that they need to hear. Right. But another problem too, and I will say that, is the messaging. The Air Force is not good at messaging at all.
Agreed.
They're good at, cramming things down your throat saying, hey, here's the new concept. This is what we're going to do. Get used to it. Right. Now, if they would have come in to a guy like Jason and said, hey, look, in a couple months, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're implementing. And, just start that messaging of like, hey, let's grow the behaviors now within the units to anticipate this so that when it does happen, we don't get a bunch of complainers of like, oh, this isn't going to work, because that's the classic
Yep.
mood, right? Like, oh, this sucks,
No, and yeah, it's like soliciting, like giving them a heads up what's coming, explaining what the reason is, getting buy-in, getting feedback to tweak it.
Yep.
Maybe. No, that all makes sense. And I think if it was framed that way, like, because I think a lot of people don't realize that the Air Force training apparatus, from basic training to permanent party in the field, like, it's not a lean process. It's very much a batch and queues sort of process, which as anybody knows from continuous improvement, like if you batch and queue, it's not going to be efficient. And tossing MRA to, the further on the back end and allowing the guy to come out to the field and start turning wrenches and learning is definitely going to be a more efficient model, instead of having him sit at tech school waiting for an MRA class to open up at this base, and then it's TDY, and then here, and then here. It makes sense. So at least it's chasing an efficiency. I can certainly agree with that.
See, the test, just one last thing on that. See, like when the Air Force tests something out, that batch and that group of individuals, they're all in. Oh, this is great. This is going to work. This is going to be fantastic. And so that's the feedback that they get, like, is from that test bed, correct? Right. But in the meantime, when the Air Force is testing something, it's pretty much 99% sure, like, hey, this is going to come to fruition. Like, we're going to do this, right? If this works, we're going to do it. So nobody actually knows what's going on in the field, right? So they don't know, like, hey, we're trying this new concept out, and it's really working and we like it, but, instead it's just dumped on them. Like, and so now adjust to this. And so,
I wonder how much of that positive feedback is just from people that don't like to say no or don't like to be critical. Like, there's very much like a self-feeding sort of environment where if something new comes along, the people that want to get promoted or the people that want to get in good with the higher ups will run with it with a positive attitude, and they'll either intentionally or unintentionally be blind to like the negatives and the critiques. And that's where you said, if 99% of the time the Air Force says they're going to do something, they test it out, it's probably going to come to fruition. And everybody thinks it's great because they're bought in, either because they're bought into the idea or they're bought into being a part of the development of the idea, which is going to be an EPR bullet, a feather in their hat, or any number of other things that kind of influence that outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But I think that comes with experience, right? The ability to speak up when you see something not right, or the ability to and not just like a problem, but just like, hey, this is a concept that might not work. I don't know. I've never really experienced any blowback from speaking up, right? So I think I was kind of in a safe environment. I was able to do that. I don't know why. Some experiences are different with other people, but
well, I think you also have a better way. Like, I'm really fucking abrasive and crass and rude and condescending. And you're much more like personable and like charming and like collaborative. So it might be that you're just better at it.
Yeah, but sometimes,
like, legitimately.
Well, I think, a guy like your personality, you're like, hey, I want this done. Like, it needs to get done now. Let's not sit around and talk about it. Like, here's the issue. Let's fix it. Right. And sometimes that's needed just as much as the collaboration.
Yeah.
Because there are things that can be immediately fixed. Right. There are things that can be like, but there is a lot of red tape. And a lot of the red tape in the training environment with the Air Force is centered around community college of the Air Force, because all of these classes that we teach and that these airmen take are college accredited courses, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's tons of oversight. I mean, for just to be an instructor, for example, there was like 4 different regulations that I had to keep track of just to qualify to be able to stay in the classroom, right? And that's a lot, and CCAF was the driving factor of all of that. And of course, even when it comes to course validation and creation. And so, what happened with, I'm pretty sure what happened with these robust training programs, you get a lot of college credits for them, right? So you reduce that, you reduce that length of training or whatever it is, that type of training, and you reduce the level, then you're going to reduce the college credit availability of that. And so that's also in the long term going to affect, the CCAF capabilities of the students. So that's something to think about too. What impacts the training of the Air Force? I would say that Air University kind of runs the show when it comes to silently runs the show when it comes to the regulation and requirements of maintenance training.
Yeah, so I was a maintenance training instructor at Luke from 2007 to 2010, and luckily none of our classes were CCF accredited, so it was like
freedom.
Yeah, you just I want to get rid of this and hack it away, and I want to do this, and let's build a new course, and let's just put it together and call it a day, and that was the end of it. It was like. Now it also could be the quality of our instruction was trash because we had no like academic standard. I don't know, but from the output that I saw, it seemed like the students understood forms, doc, and engine run, especially because that was like a highly technical thing that I made sure people were like. And I was a certifier, so I saw 6 months later whether they were good or not.
Right.
I don't know.
You had checks and balances. I mean, you had I think like with engine run, you had AFITs that had to come in and.
Oh yeah, and like when I was a certifier, and I'm not gonna. There was 3 of us teaching for a while, and I could tell who their instructor was during certification, which is like, oh, you don't know a lot, so your instructor was so and so, or you're really good. You were so that I could definitely see it there, but that's also you're right. Certifying was definitely the checks and balances because if you don't know it, you're not going to go forward, and that's just how it's going to be. And I really want to unpack the CCF thing, but I don't have time right now. We don't have time. We might set up another one. So I want to talk about the OJT because we talked briefly about OJT is just going to be a natural part of growing a crew chief. That the mission ready concept is not feasible. You'd probably have to have airmen in training for 2 years to truly be like mission ready when they show up to the line. That's just not like a realistic sort of scenario. So OJT is like a really critical part of growing young airmen to be mechanics and technicians that both you and I really experienced in what I felt was a very good environment. And I don't know if it's we got lucky with our trainers or the Air Force was just culturally better at taking young airmen and letting them put hands on and slowing down getting the jet fixed to give a young airman time with the task. Sure. But it seemed certainly in the last, at least after 2010, that very often the production monster was so overpowering that OJT seemed to really become a secondary sort of consideration. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like we would always put our top guys on every single task, and the airmen would be holding a flashlight or getting out tools, and they weren't getting the hands-on time. And as that progressed, as we constantly chased sorties and sortie production, it felt like we were digging a experience hole that we didn't even perceive. So I guess my question to you is, and you might not have seen a whole lot of it just because of where you were at the tail end of your career compared to the front. I guess generally, or from what you've seen or heard, is OJT now in the same sort of realm as OJT you experienced as a young A1C and senior airman?
I would have to say probably not, just given the fact that there's less people, right? I remember when I was leaving in 2008, I found an old roll call sheet.
Oh yeah.
Right, and it was like 30 people, and that was just one flight.
Yep.
Right. That was one flight of 30 people. And then I think when I was leaving in 2008, we might have had 15 total between both flights on one shift. Right. And so, so I was starting to experience that. And so, of course, I mean, I think it's when you don't have the bodies to spend the time with someone, of course, it's going to have an effect of like, hey, we're not going to be able to train these guys the way that we say that we're able to as professionals. Right. And so then there's an even bigger reliance on, well, they better be trained right in tech school, because it's important that they get it and that when they get here, they're ready to go. Right. But again, I think it's just neither one is best scenario, because what profession anywhere outside of the military do you come out of a trade school or come out of, college and you're like, you're an expert, go do it. Right. It's just nowhere. That's nowhere, but that is the expectation with technical training in the Air Force, especially when you're low manned on the receiving end. But hey, you better know how to do this, right? You better know how to put air in this tire. Don't make me have to pull somebody off another job, or you become the guy who sucks because I had to pull somebody else. And that's just not a fair mentality to the airmen at all, or to the unit, you know.
Yeah. So if you were an expediter in '08 when your Manning went to trash, like that was the battle you had to deal with every night, right? Which was I need to clear my plate. I need to fix all the jets for tomorrow, and I have 4 heavy hitters and like 8 airmen that don't necessarily know anything, and I can try to split them up. So I mean, you would battle that every night as an expediter, right?
Yeah.
And what was your priority, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, just whatever needed to fly the next day.
Right.
You know,
because the reality is, the schedule is always going to take priority over the training.
The training.
It is, right?
Yeah. And that's fun. You know, that's a good point, because when I got to Shepherd, and and it took me a while to get, to be trained, to be an instructor, to be by yourself. And when I finally got a classroom, like there's bad instructors too. Like you get paired with someone, you're like, yeah, I don't want to teach that way. Like that's not, because even within the instructor world, you get those naysayers that are like, oh, well, this is how it's really going to be done on the flight line, instead of why.
Yeah. Why are you tainting?
Right. Why now? Like, hey, here's no, if this is the way the TO is written, and this is the way the course is written, and this is what the customer, like you talk about customer service, and this is what the customer is expecting, let's give them that. Let's try our best to give them that, instead of just planting that seed of like, oh, this sucks. Right. Like that is the worst. Like, oh, to get an airman that's been in for 2 seconds to say something sucks, right? Like, how do you know? What do you have it to compare to, right? It's only because someone told you that you're saying that. And so I really I took it upon myself to be like, you know what? I'm not going to do this, right? Even if our trainers, our GITAs are not up to par, and that it's not what they're going to see on the flight line, I would always try to be like, this is the best training you're ever going to get, right? This is top notch. This is it. Like, just encourage them in that way, to just be like, look, I can be good at my job, and I want to be good at my job, and just give them everything that they can have, because I started to realize the importance of that. Like I really did. Like, hey, they need you, to be good at what it is that they're hired you to be good at. Right. And, but not everybody had that same philosophy.
You think you think that's a symptom of the non-vol process that a lot of instructors were picked for, that people were showing up to Shepherd pissed off that they were taken off a track that they had expected, and they're at Wichita Falls, which is not the most glamorous environment, and they might have had a bad taste in their mouth for AETC or training anyway? Sort
of. So like I was in '08, I was kind of the first of a couple that were the non-vols. When I got there, everybody was pretty much had been set there for a while, where they applied for the jobs and were hired. I would say after me, pretty much everybody was a non-vol. And but you also, I hate to say this, but even in the hiring process, I don't know if people just exaggerate things of their qualifications or what, but there can be some instructors that just aren't up to par, who really shouldn't be there at all, or just lazy, or just don't want to engage the students. And that's why I said when I started, like, it opened up a whole new world to me. Like, I never knew that I could teach to that capacity, right? That wasn't something that I knew I had inside of me until I started teaching. Like, I went there with a sour lip, oh, I don't want to be here. But as soon as I got in the classroom and started teaching, I was like, wow, you can really have an impact on these airmen's life and help them along in their career. And I really enjoyed it.
I loved when I was doing maintenance training. I loved the classroom time. I absolutely adored it. I loved when people would get concepts, or they would figure stuff out, and you could see like their knowledge and proficiency grow. I hated all the ancillary training pieces, like the outside the classroom time. I didn't enjoy, but I agree. Like I really thrived as an instructor and enjoyed it. So I know we're on a time crunch, so I want to touch on a couple things real quick. So, you have, master's in education, right? And you've done training development for a while, both as a military member and as a civilian. How, like, as a customer of training, which is what I was for most of my career, and I probably speak for the majority of the people that are listening, CBTs suck. Like, they're not effective. And I always wondered when a new CBT would come out, if the person that developed was like, this is going to be the CBT that people like, and this is going to be the CBT that people actually do.
Sure.
Like CBTs feels like it's really offloading what should be like real instruction that the Air Force or an organization in general can't afford to do in person because of the cost, the time, or whatever. But CBTs, like when you're talking about like your annual information protection, like like none of it's good.
Yeah.
All I remember from that is pull out my CAC and don't take the mixtape from the dude and don't chase down the guy with my phone and call my security manager and I'm going to get all the fucking trophies.
What is it, Operation Purple Dragon?
Yeah, and then like the boxing match, I get a little bit mad when I don't get max points on the boxing match or like finding the fax machine in the fucking where in the world is Carmen Sandiego game. But like none of that's fucking useful. Although I guess the people listening would be like, boy, you sure remember a lot from that fucking CBT, Chris. Maybe it was more effective than you thought. But like there's a lot of CBTs that are just trash. And is that just like the Air Force or I mean, I don't want you to speculate, but I guess have you ever been involved in a discussion about development of CBTs, effectiveness of CBTs or anything like that?
Not exactly. But I do know, I have been in the unit, at Shepherd. A lot of that stuff's created at Shepherd. There's a unit there that creates the digital CBTs, and there's a lot of money involved in those. They're expensive. They're expensive to develop. I think it's just one of those things. It's like, all right, are we going to pull people away from their work centers, to go sit in an auditorium somewhere and listen to all this for all day? Or is there something that we can just give them that checks the box, that meets the requirement that the AFI says that we have to have this type of training? And I think that's just the lesser of the two evils. Is just like, hey, let's create a course where they can do it at their workstation or their work center and not be pulled away. But you're right. I mean, it's like even now as a civilian training manager, there's some things like I create most of the content that we need because it's a money saver. But there are things that I need, like OSHA regulations. So if I can compare it to the Air Force, like there's OSHA compliance stuff that we need to do, like just say lockout, tagout, right?
Yep.
I read the reg and I'm like, all right, what's the minimum amount of time that we can spend on this? And then I go and find micro courses that are like 30 seconds to 3 minutes long that check all the boxes of like, hey, because the government regulation says, hey, you have to have this type of training. And it's very vague in how in depth it has to be. Is it an overview, or do I have to sit there with you and say, okay, this is a glove. This is how you put the glove on. And so when it's vague, I'm going to go the shortest possible route, right? The least impactful that can still have some sort of learning transfer, right? Because in all training, you want some sort of learning transfer to take place. You're not going to remember everything. You're not, unless you go back and you just study it and, if you spend days remembering it. But if there's just a couple little nuggets that you can take away and remember, then it's going to be effective, right? So like you remember, hey, I need to pull my CAT card out of my computer. So you remembered something, right? So it was successful.
Well, I'm going to edit that out of the podcast because I don't want anybody to see that I admitted that a CBT was useful. So
don't get me wrong. There's some garbage out there. There is, and we all sit there. For example, okay, here's an example. So yesterday, my son had his first day at Dick's Sporting Goods. Right, it was orientation. Basically, what the orientation was, he sat in the golf department at a computer and did CBTs.
Mm-hmm.
And the manager even came over to him and said, "Oh, this stuff sucks."
Yep.
And so there's the seed that was implanted. And I looked at him, I said, as a training manager, that's what I hate to hear, son. It's like someone telling you that the training sucks. I go, because from now on, for the rest of your life, anytime you sit down to do any type of training, what's going to be in your head? This sucks. Like,
yep.
This really.
When I got hired on after I moved to New England, I worked at a company and I got hired on as a production supervisor, and I think I got 270 training tasks loaded that had to be done within 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all a bunch of CBTs. And I literally opened the first one. It was like 2 hours long. And I'm like mathematically, it's not fucking possible for me to do these. And I went to my supervisor. He's like, oh, nobody does those. Just make sure they're done before the 30-day. And I'm like, Okay, so it's the Air Force all over again. Got it. Click through.
So I try to not let that happen where I work now. I just want when I create something, I give it to someone and say, hey, do you enjoy this? I need you to review this. Do you enjoy this? Are you learning something? And if not, tell me, because I don't want to send it out if it's not going to be that.
So what does the Air Force do right with training?
I think there's a lot of things, man. I just think organization of it is phenomenal. Like I said at the beginning, the size and the budget is just, there's nothing it can compare to. There really isn't. And it's got great oversight. It's got great, the concepts are there. It's just, I really think it's robust. It has the potential, and I think it is the best in the world. It has the potential to be even better if the messaging to the units was a little better of how important they play a role in completing the training, right? Even with the MRT concept, the 3C concept, I don't think, in my opinion, others can agree and disagree, that's not where it stops. It can't.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one area, not where it gets wrong, but it can be improved, is that the units take ownership of the people and say, thank you for training them for us. Thank you for giving them the basics and teaching them. But now we're going to make them who we need them to be. Not going to make them our own or going to go against what they've already learned. But now, hey, this is a different environment. This is where the rubber meets the road, and we're gonna mold them into how we need them to be.
Well, I know we're running out of time because you got a hard stop coming up. Is there any final thoughts or anything that you want to unpack that we haven't unpacked?
I think it's good to trust in that we can have faith in the system, that it does work, that there are some issues, and I do think they could do things a little bit better in certain areas like we've talked about. But when it comes to I would like to see, and maybe we could talk about this later, even with the CCAF stuff, a lot of the pilot thought of how pilots are trained in the Air Force carried over into the maintenance environment. I can't speak of other environments. Like, I think Special Ops does a really good job of training their, I've talked to a couple guys and I've seen some of their training, and they do a really good family type atmosphere when it comes to training, just like the pilots have. Like, it's like it's a family affair. We want to see others succeed more than ourselves. And I think if that could be brought in over to the maintenance side of training, that it could be even better.
Okay. I don't think I have anything else, but I suspect we're probably going to do another one of these in a few weeks. I would imagine.
Fun, man.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate your time, Hoppy. And I really enjoyed the perspective, because from the outside looking in, you don't see everything that goes into training. And I think this gave us at least the beginning of an idea of the intricacies of training. So thank you.
Right. Yeah, you bet. Appreciate it.
All right. Adios. That's the show. I can't thank you enough for reading, listening, and watching and supporting everything that I've done with 20 Years Done. If you're new to this podcast, I recommend you go to 20yearsdone.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/20yearsdone.